Poppie Merwe was born on July 15, 2013 in the quiet provincial town of Brits, located in the province of northwest South Africa. Her birth was a long-awaited event for her parents, who surrounded the girl with love and care. From the very beginning, Poppie's life promised to be bright and joyful. Her parents tried to create an ideal world for their daughter, full of happiness and warmth. Since birth, Poppie has become the center of attention in her family. Her big brown eyes looked at the world around her with curiosity, and her ringing laughter filled the house with warmth. Her father worked in a local workshop, repairing machinery, and her mother devoted herself to the house and raising a child. Every day was scheduled so that all attention was focused on little Poppie. The family lived in a cozy house on a quiet street, where an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility reigned. A white fence, a small garden with flowers and toys scattered on the neatly manicured lawn gave the house the appearance of a real family idyll. Neighbors often saw Poppie playing outside with colorful balls or trying to catch butterflies by running around the yard. Her joyful laughter could be heard far beyond the house. From a very young age, Poppie showed a bright personality. Her parents recall that she was incredibly active and inquisitive. She loved learning new things and enjoyed participating in family activities. Her father proudly taught her how to ride a bike, and her mother helped her take her first steps in creativity. Poppie loved to draw. Every day she sat at a small table in the corner of the room which her parents had specially allocated for her classes. Her albums were quickly filled with colorful drawings depicting the sun, clouds, and houses with red roofs. Her parents were proud of her work and decorated the walls of the house with it. Her favorite drawings were those of her family, her mother, father, and herself, always with smiles on their faces. When Poppie turned 2, her parents decided it was time to send her to kindergarten. It was an important step for the whole family. They wanted her to start communicating with other children, learn to be friends, and develop in a team. Poppie quickly adapted to the new environment. The teachers noted her friendliness and desire to help other children. She was someone who could share toys with other children, even if they were her favorites. Neighbors described the Merwe family as an example of benevolence and harmony. They often saw Poppie walking outside or riding a tricycle in the yard. She was a beautiful child who immediately caught the eye. Her blonde hair was often braided, and her clothes were mostly bright colors. The parents seemed to do everything to make their daughter feel loved. October 25, 2016 began as another quiet day in the provincial city of Brits, South Africa. Residents went about their usual business. The streets were filled with pedestrians and cars, and the local shops and cafes were bustling. The house of the Merwe family did not stand out from the rest. The silence and regularity of the street created an impression of peace and tranquility. Poppie woke up early, her joyful laughter echoing through the rooms. My mother was cooking breakfast, and my stepfather was going to work. Poppie, dressed in her favorite pink pajamas, was playing with plush toys in the living room, occasionally popping into the kitchen to ask when her favorite cocoa would be ready. The parents looked calm. Their conversations were ordinary, every day. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Neighbors who sometimes saw the family in the morning later recalled that they had not noticed anything suspicious that day. There were no loud quarrels or signs of conflict in the house. It all looked like another peaceful day in the family's life. Towards noon, the tranquility of the house was disrupted. Neighbors later said they heard loud noises from the house, as if something had fallen or someone had slammed the door. Then came the screams, which sounded muffled but alarming. Some of the neighbors looked outside to see what was going on. However, when they didn't hear anything new, they went back to their business, deciding that it was just a family dispute. After a while, the door of the house suddenly opened, and Poppie's stepfather ran out into the street. In his arms was the body of a girl who seemed lifeless. He was barefoot, and his face expressed panic and horror. The man screamed for help and headed for his car parked nearby. Without wasting any time, the stepfather put Poppie in the car and, turning on the siren if possible, rushed to the nearest hospital. Along the way, he continued to try to bring the girl to her senses, calling her by name and gently patting her cheeks. But Poppie didn't react. Her body remained motionless and her face was pale. The man held the steering wheel tighter, his breathing was heavy, and his thoughts were chaotic. He tried to explain to himself what had happened, repeating the words in his head. She fell. She just fell. But deep down, he already understood that the situation was much more complicated. At that moment, the stepfather hoped for only one thing: to get to the hospital on time. When he arrived at Brits Provincial Hospital, the parking lot was relatively empty. The man jumped out of the car, holding Poppie in his arms, and rushed to the emergency room. His screams immediately attracted the attention of the medical staff. He screamed that the girl had fallen down the stairs and lost consciousness. Her condition looked critical, and doctors immediately began an examination. The doctors transferred the girl to a gurney and began resuscitation measures. They tried to start her heart, but Poppie showed no signs of life. The man was nearby all the time, clutching her toy, which he grabbed from the car. His face expressed a mixture of fear and despair. The news that Poppie was taken to the hospital without signs of life quickly spread through the area. The neighbors were shocked. Many of them remembered what a sweet and joyful girl Poppie was. No one could believe that something so terrible could happen to her. When the stepfather of 3-year-old Poppie Vander Merwe took her to the Brits Provincial Hospital, doctors immediately began an examination. His words about the girl falling down the stairs sounded plausible at first glance. However, with every passing minute, the doctors noticed more and more inconsistencies that made them doubt this version. Something about the man's behavior and the girl's condition made them uneasy. When the doctors admitted the girl, they noticed her appearance. Her body was covered with bruises that immediately seemed suspicious. Falling down stairs by themselves is not uncommon, especially in young children. But the nature of the injuries found on Poppie's body did not match this situation. The bruises were of different shades, indicating that they had appeared at different times. That was the first alarm signal. The doctor who led the intensive care unit later recalled that the injuries looked unnatural. "We immediately had questions," he said in a statement. "If the child really fell, why does she have so many old injuries? And why didn't the mother or stepfather seek medical help sooner?" These questions became the starting point for a deeper examination. During the examination, doctors revealed several old rib fractures that had already begun to heal, as well as bruises on his arms, legs, and back. There were burn-like marks and small cuts that looked healed. The chief physician noted that for a 3-year-old child, such injuries could only be the result of prolonged violence. The traumatic brain injury that Poppie suffered on the day of her death was the main cause of her death. However, the nature of the injuries indicated the use of significant force. It was a blow that couldn't be received by accident. No child could have fallen in such a way as to get such injuries, one of the doctors said later. These findings led doctors to assume that falling down the stairs was just a cover for what really happened. Meanwhile, the stepfather, who was in the emergency department, kept repeating the same story. He assured the doctors that the girl was playing on the stairs and fell, hitting her head. However, his behavior raised questions. The man looked visibly nervous. He avoided looking into the eyes of the doctors. His hands were shaking and his voice was confused. When the doctors asked him clarifying questions, he began to speak confusedly or stopped altogether. When the doctors asked the man to explain how long ago the girl had old injuries, he began to justify himself. "She falls down a lot," he said. "She's very active, constantly running." This explanation seemed unconvincing, given the severity and variety of the injuries. His attempts to mitigate the situation only increased suspicions. Poppie's mother, who arrived at the hospital sometime later, behaved even more strangely. She didn't look devastated or scared, as one would expect from a mother whose daughter is in critical condition. Her gaze was distant, and her answers to police and medical questions were monosyllabic and confusing. One of the doctors later remarked, "Her reaction was strange. She showed no fear or grief. It feels like she knew in advance how it would end. This observation reinforced suspicions that the tragedy could have been the result of violence rather than an accident. After it became clear that it was not possible to save the girl, the doctors made an initial report on her condition. The main cause of death was identified as a traumatic brain injury inflicted with the use of significant force. Additionally, the report noted the presence of numerous old injuries, including fractures, bruises, and cuts. This report became a key document that confirmed that the version about falling down the stairs does not stand up to criticism. The doctors understood that they were dealing with a suspicious case and could not remain indifferent. They decided to contact law enforcement immediately. The medical staff contacted the local police department, informing them that the child's injuries indicated possible violence. The officer on duty, who accepted the call, realized the seriousness of the situation and sent a group of operatives to the hospital. The doctors provided the police with a full report on the girl's condition, including their conclusions about the inconsistency of the injuries with the described situation. They also reported on the strange behavior of their stepfather and mother, emphasizing that their stories do not coincide with each other and contain many contradictions. Officers arrived at the hospital around noon. They started by taking initial statements from their stepfather. The man continued to insist that Poppie had fallen down the stairs. However, his answers were still confused. He was confused about the details. At first, he said that the girl fell on the first step. Then he mentioned that she was at the top of the stairs. His story was becoming less and less plausible. Poppie's mother was also questioned. Her answers turned out to be even more bizarre. She claimed that she did not see the moment of the fall, as she was in another room. When asked why the girl had old injuries, she replied that children always fall. Her indifference shocked the officers. Already at this stage, the police began to suspect that Poppie's death was the result of systematic violence. The officers decided to go to the Merwe family home to conduct a search. They also asked the doctors to provide all possible documentation about the girl's condition in order to use it as evidence. The doctors and the police began to work together, realizing that they were facing a case that required a thorough investigation. The officers who arrived at the Merwe family home immediately noticed its unusual atmosphere. At first glance, everything looked neat. The furniture was in its place, the rooms were clean, and the stairs that allegedly caused the tragedy did not look dangerous. It was an ordinary wooden staircase with a not too steep slope. The police immediately noticed that a fall from it could hardly have caused such serious injuries. A detailed inspection of the house began to change the picture. Small bloodstains were found on the carpet next to the stairs, which were not noticed by the stepfather or the mother. The police also found a broken wooden rail that looked like it had been used for a punch. These findings made the officers doubt that the tragedy was an accident. Poppie's baby clothes were found in one of the bedrooms. The police noted that there were also bloodstains on her clothes, hanging in the closet. All these clues suggested that the stepfather's version of the fall was not only unconvincing, but also probably completely made up. Police also began interviewing neighbors to find out what the Merwe family looked like from the outside. At first glance, the family seemed prosperous, a well-maintained house, friendly parents, and an always smiling Poppie. However, when the officers started asking more specific questions, it became clear that there was a lot hidden behind this picture. Several neighbors admitted that they often heard screams from the house. "I thought they were just fighting," said one of the neighbors, "but now I understand that something terrible could have happened there." Another neighbor said he saw bruises on Poppie's body while she was playing outside. "I once asked her mother what happened, but she said the girl just fell off her bike," he added. Some neighbors claimed that Poppie's stepfather was often rude and aggressive. "He was always tough. He could yell at her for any little thing," said one of the residents of the street. Others mentioned that the girl's mother looked depressed and rarely left the house. "She always seemed strange to me, as if she was afraid of something," said one of the neighbors. There were also those who claimed that they had not noticed anything suspicious. These people described the family as ordinary, unquestionable. However, the more information the police managed to gather, the clearer it became that something dark was going on in the van der Merwe house. While the officers were collecting testimony from neighbors, criminologists continued to work in the house. They collected traces of blood found on the stairs and carpet, as well as examined the damage to the furniture. Fingerprints were found on a broken wooden rail, which later matched those of Poppie's stepfather. This discovery was one of the first serious proofs that he could be involved in violence. The police also seized documents belonging to the family and began checking their financial situation. This revealed that the stepfather had recently lost his job, and Poppie's mother had outstanding bills. This information led the investigators to believe that the tense situation in the house could have provoked outbursts of aggression. Based on the evidence gathered and the testimony of neighbors, the police began to form a basic version of what happened. Investigators were increasingly inclined to believe that hidden aggression reigned in this family. Poppie was repeatedly abused, and her death was the culmination of this horrific cycle. The investigators also drew attention to the lack of signs of real care for the child in the house. Despite the cleanliness and order, there was no atmosphere of comfort or love. Everything pointed to the fact that the exterior facade of the family was just a cover for something much more sinister. Police have also reached out to relatives of the van der Merwe family to get more information. Poppie's grandmother said that the girl had rarely visited her in recent months. They used to come almost every week, but then something changed, she recalled. I asked if they were okay, but my daughter always assured me that everything was fine. Her words confirmed that the family could hide their problems even from their loved ones. After several days of careful work at the crime scene, analyzing evidence and collecting witness statements, the police concluded that the death of 3-year-old Poppie van der Merwe was not an accident. All the evidence gathered indicated that her death was the result of systematic violence. The officers decided that it was time to take the next step, to arrest the girl's mother and stepfather. The arrest occurred in the morning when police returned to the van der Merwe family home. The officers knocked on the door and Poppie's mother opened it. She looked sleepy and obviously did not expect a police visit. She was informed that she had been arrested on suspicion of murdering her daughter and concealing a crime. The woman did not resist, but her face expressed a mixture of fear and confusion. The stepfather was in another room, and when the police informed him of the arrest, he first tried to deny his involvement. I do not know what you are talking about. It was just an accident, he shouted, but the officers did not pay attention to his words. The man was handcuffed and taken out of the house. The neighbors watched from their windows and doorsteps. For many of them, the arrest was a shock, despite rumors of family oddities. People couldn't believe that this tragedy had happened right in front of their eyes. After the arrest, Poppie's mother and stepfather were taken to the police station for reinterrogation. This time, the investigators took a tougher approach, presenting the collected evidence. The officers detailed the results of the investigation, showing photographs of evidence and medical reports.
She was scared of the stepfather, and that is why she didn't get help.
Poppie's mother continued to claim that she knew nothing about the abuse and insisted that the fall from the stairs was an accident. However, under the pressure of evidence, her story began to change. She soon admitted that she knew about the abuse, but was afraid to confront her partner. I tried to protect her, but he was too strong, she told investigators, trying to absolve herself of blame. Poppie's stepfather's behavior was more aggressive. He loudly denied his guilt, accusing the police of bias. However, when he was shown photos of a broken wooden rail with his prints, the man fell silent. He refused to answer further questions, citing his right to remain silent. Based on the evidence gathered and the mother's confessions, the prosecutor filed formal charges against both suspects. The charges included the murder against the stepfather as the main perpetrator of the violent acts that led to the girl's death, child abuse against both parents for systematic violence and neglect of duties, Concealment of a crime. The mother was accused of not reporting the violence her daughter had been subjected to. The news of the arrest of Poppie's mother and stepfather spread quickly. Local media covered the event, causing a wave of indignation and anger among Brits residents. People demanded justice for the 3-year-old girl and called on the authorities to strengthen measures to protect children. After the investigation was completed, all the materials were transferred to the prosecutor's office. The case attracted a lot of public attention, and the authorities promised that the process would be as transparent as possible. The trial began a few weeks after the arrest, and the case has become one of the most high-profile in the region. The trial in the case of the death of 3-year-old Poppie van der Merwe began on January 15, 2017 in the District Court of Brits, South Africa. This case shocked the public with its brutality and caused a wave of indignation. From the first days of the trial, attention was focused on the defendants, the girl's mother, Susanna van der Merwe, and her roommate Johan Smith. The prosecution presented them as the main culprits of the tragedy, which ended with the death of a little girl after months of systematic violence. The trial began with statements from the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution, led by prosecutor John Meyer, presented Poppie as an innocent victim who was in a position of complete dependence on adults who were called upon to take care of her. The prosecutor noted, "This little girl could not defend herself. Her death was the culmination of a long period of violence that should have been noticed and prevented." The defense, in turn, tried to present the incident as a tragic mistake. Susanna's lawyers argued that she herself was a victim of control and manipulation by Johan Smith. Smith's lawyers, on the other hand, insisted that the girl's injuries were the result of her unfortunate falls, and that the prosecution would not be able to prove his intent. The prosecutor presented an extensive evidence base. The doctors who performed the autopsy confirmed that the cause of death was a severe injury inflicted with significant force. They also pointed out numerous old injuries, including fractures, bruises, and abrasions. Among the objects found in the house was a wooden slat, which was supposed to be used for striking. Smith's fingerprints and traces of Poppie's DNA were found on it. Several witnesses said they often heard screams and noises from the family home. Some people saw bruises on the girl's body, but her mother and stepfather always explained them as the result of her falls. The prosecutor stressed that Susanna had ignored signs of child abuse for months, and Smith had been seen to be aggressive. Susanna van der Merwe stated during the interrogation that she knew about the violence, but was afraid to confront her partner. "He threatened me, and I didn't know what to do," she said. Her lawyers tried to present her as a victim, unable to protect either herself or her daughter. Johan Smith categorically denied his guilt, insisting that he had never harmed Poppie. However, his explanations became less and less convincing, especially after the prosecutor presented the results of the fingerprint analysis on the wooden rail. After several weeks of hearings, the prosecutor delivered a closing speech in which he described in detail the entire chain of events that led to the tragedy. He stressed that Poppie's mother and stepfather not only failed to fulfill their duties to protect the child, but also actively contributed to her suffering. In her final speech, the defense tried to mitigate Susanna's guilt by presenting her as a victim, but acknowledged that the evidence against Smith was convincing.
And the mother and stepfather of Poppie van der Merwe have been sentenced to life imprisonment for her murder in the North Gauteng High Court.
On February 28, 2017, the judge handed down the verdict. Johan Smith was found guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. Susanna van der Merwe was found guilty of complicity and concealment of a crime. She received 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 2/3 of the sentence. The judge said in a statement, "Poppie van der Merwe's death is a tragedy that should never have happened. The defendants not only failed her, but also betrayed the most sacred thing, the child's trust in his parents. The story of Poppie van der Merwe has left a deep mark in the hearts of Brest residents and the whole of South Africa. Her tragic death was a reminder of the fragility of the lives of the most vulnerable members of society and how important it is to notice the signs of trouble in time. The trial has ended, the perpetrators have been punished, but the pain and questions left by this case will remain for many years. Poppie's death has highlighted issues that have been in the shadows for too long. Neighbors who heard the screams but did not intervene. Relatives who noticed changes in the family's behavior but did not ask unnecessary questions. Social services who failed to identify the situation in time. All these factors played a role in the fact that the tragedy remained unnoticed until the last moment. This case has become a reminder of how important it is not to remain indifferent. Many Brest residents later confessed that they felt guilty for their inaction. Some have even started to actively participate in local initiatives aimed at protecting children.